from. And also for food, raiment, life, for opportunity, friendship, and fellowship. We thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right, and Patty Caperton is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible.
With liberty.
and justice for all.
Would you be seated and Donna is going to introduce our yes?
Woo!
Yo, Donna.
Good afternoon. Our afternoon guests are Sean. Yeah, Sean May, Irving and Jordan Price.
Well, now before Terry comes up and introduce our speaker, whom we all know, I just want to make an announcement of good news. They found the missing flags. Yes. They were behind the Masonic lawn. And the guy from Rambler found them and told Daryl Plunkett and said, "Are you a Rotarian? Because I found these flags." And Daryl put him on to me. And anyway, the flags are home and they're in good shape. We don't have to buy new flags. And Rick is, as you might imagine, has taken them under his personal care and safety. So we had the service flags, for these guys don't know, service flags at Millennium Fountain were stolen on the day of Memorial Day. And then, so, Terry, Oliver. Terry. Terry.
Good afternoon, guys.
Go to get some work out of it.
No.
Highly technical test.
You brought your own.
Yes, good.
Sweet. Okay, good afternoon. Today we have the pleasure of Marilyn Willems is going to be speaking to us. I know this is a familiar face from Rotary.
Yeah.
Speaking to us on a new topic today.
Yay.
Hey.
That isn't prepared speaker. She brings her own.
She said this before.
Yeah.
He knows it.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me better now? Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, good. Well, thank you all so very much for inviting me back to the Rotary Club. I love to be here. And in the past, I have thoroughly enjoyed being about my favorite volunteer position in the urban community, and that is with Friends of the Urban Library. But surprisingly, I didn't be the speaker today. I had already prepared myself to say no, because I thought that maybe heard enough of me from the library. Well, she pulled a surprise and she said, "Would you know what it's like to be a docent at the Dallas Museum of Art?" And I thought, oh my goodness, first of all, I think we better start out with maybe finding out what is a docent at the Dallas Museum of Art. And since we're in this big room, and I had expected a smaller room, click. I just have to take some of you that have lived in the Dallas area for some time back to about 1980, and this is a scene of Lost Avenue. You remember the car dealership? Used car. Some other places. Well, that was about the time Dallas Museum of Art decided it was time to move from Fair Park to a new location. So I want to brag a little bit on the fact that they had a great foresight in choosing that location, because it is now known as the Art Center, and all of you know it's stretching from on the east end of the Windspear Opera House all the way down to the Thoreau Museum is literally filled with reasons to come into the art district in Dallas. And it's on 15 minutes away, so there's absolutely no excuse to not have a visit down there. So in addition to the volunteer time I spend here in Irving Musical Library, for the last, embarrassed to say this, for the last 22 years, I've been a docent at the Dallas Museum of Art. There we are. So what is a docent? Basically, I even went back and discovered it was from a nice Latin word that means an expert on the subject. Well, I'm not sure I can claim that kind of a title, but just to boil it down to simple language, I lead tours at the Dallas Museum of Art on sometimes more than just once a week basis. I go to anything from student groups that are fourth grade and up to adults, and that is really a joy. I wouldn't have been there that long if it hadn't been joy. Play with the group, meet interesting people, and what better way to have some fun learning experiences along the way. So I decided the only way to really introduce you to that title was not just by standing up here talking to you. We are going on to it.
All right, fine.
So with that in mind, somebody want to look at it. So this is an interactive tool. We have conversations about it. It's not a matter of me standing and lecturing to people. So I was going to tell you kind of how we get started with a tool. And so to begin with, you got to kind of go with me. I want you to kind of scroll your life back to when you were 9 or 10 years old, and you were in maybe the 4th or 5th grade, and you are very excited about coming to a museum. Maybe you've never been to a museum before. We have a lot of students who never experienced something like being able to go to a museum, which doesn't even know what one is all about. So that could be you. You could be excited. You could be nervous. There's a lot of things. So once I brief my group, and since we're starting out with you as the told, I introduce myself, and then we walk up to the 4th floor in the museum. I never let kids get enough exercise. When we get to the top, they are happy to sit down on the floor. I sit and with them so that we can have a conversation. So there we are. So here we are. We have climbed up to the 4th floor. We are sitting in front of an object that I think it's pretty interesting to you. So I usually sit there and let them sit for a minute, and then I say, "What do you notice? What do you notice?" And now it's your turn to talk. You're supposed to answer. What do you notice? This is an act. Remember that. What do you see? What do you notice?
The teeth.
Say it out.
The teeth.
The teeth. Oh,
Yeah, he's a dentist.
might be missing with you. Maybe he needs the depths. What do you think? Those are just things I might say. What's something else you notice?
You seem to be guarding whatever.
I think it's a South American deity.
South American deity. Let's follow that line of thought. Perhaps that's somebody else. What do you see, Rick?
I think I love the frogs and the statue.
Oh, the
Sometimes it's a god here. Marilyn, you're doing great.
frogs are very important. And I'll hear you use the first thing that goes. I think the first thing to talk about. And so I see them. Frogs, pretty frogs leader. Deer.
Water.
They live in the water, so maybe it's a clue we ought to follow to figure out. By the way, do you know what an archaeologist is? Believe it or not, they would.
Sure, because they've watched Indiana Jones. Yeah.
It's we talk about. And they say, well, you're kind of like an archaeologist because you've climbed up to the 4th floor to see this object. And that's the point where they found it. on a hill in the southern part of Mexico. Trust me, they all know Mexico, 70% of it, annual Friday. That's a good place to start. And I might interject, I nearly always start that age group with a three-dimensional object that seem to relate to the vendor. And in just looking at a painting, so that really captures their attention right off. So tell me one or two other things that you've noticed about this.
Looks like he's wearing a crown.
Ah, he's wearing, oh, and that's gonna be pretty important. So let's talk a little bit about what he is. So you're doing a pretty good job of identifying things. But in fact, it was learned that among the Aztec Indians who lived in this part of Mexico back 700 years ago. They had a lot. So let's all say the name of this God again. A lot. Kind of fun to roll with there and talk about that. So he is the God of rain and lightning. And that earlier you mentioned just a minute ago is to reflect. You can't see it in this picture, but the three dimensions show the things that are coming out of that ground that look a lot like lightning. So there's a time of year when rain is really important. So what is rain so important to us? So look at
Crops.
As far as if I said that they thought was born, something that might be big. They also do indigenous, so that. So that's, they're pretty much on the track. And so then I'm thinking, well, you know, sometimes rain is not so good if there's too much of it. Kind of things happen if there's too much rain.
What?
Mosquitoes.
All of those, but I'll guarantee you, they will always say a tsunami.
Oh.
Isn't that interesting? Never fail. Somewhere. Interesting. No. So here we are. We've identified what it is. We've identified the purpose of it, except to say that every year in the spring, they have a celebration to the god of rain and lightning, so that we have rain, so that the crops will produce. And that's by taking up in that ground that you've noticed. They put little twigs and different things and started fires, and the smoke billows up and and these represents the clouds that I'm going to see, and it's the truth.
You're gonna speak up a little bit.
Is that better? It's gonna fall.
Yes.
So. So.
Yes.
Oh, close. There you go. All right, so. I was gonna tell you a secret, something that's really true, because one of the men who has worked here in the museum for the last 20 years has said for a fact, if we ever want to move this work of art to a different location, guess what happens?
It rains.
Great.
Within 48 hours, we have a flood. They swear it's the truth.
Ah.
So, we don't want that to happen. Okay, fast forward. We're gonna get to our own ages, whatever that is in the room. And present the same object, but to adults, just to give you a sense of the things we talk about with our young visitors versus those of us who could be considered adults. Anyway, and doing that, I would say adults that back in 1967, The director of the Dallas Museum of Art, his name was Merrill Rupert, received a letter. And let me read that letter to you. So we're talking to adults. Here are the pictures of a 5-foot, 5-inch terracotta polychronic head that we discussed. This object is en route to the Dallas Museum of Art and weighs over 400 pounds, but it's all in pieces. Oh. However, we are sending a man with it that knows how to reassemble it. And it will take him about 10 days to put it together. And if you were up close, you could probably see the seams and all pieces. So next time you go to the museum, look, you'll see. Anyway, it will take him about 10 days to assemble. Signed, Stanley Marcus. Maybe you recognize that because I wanted to just say, I would say to adults, Stanley was on the board of directors for the Dallas Museum of Art for 60 years. He was extremely instrumental in expanding the categories of art that the Dallas Museum has. He was especially active back in the 50s, early 60s, 50s primarily, in obtaining what he figured were valuable pieces of art from Mexico at a time when they could be purchased very reasonably. And then he went on and a little bit later, about 1 decade later, to do the same thing in a fascinating story regarding some contemporary art. I'll say that you'll just have to come to the museum and see me, and maybe I'll tell you that story as well. Because sometimes for groups of people, especially members of the museum, I do a lot of stories of the acquisitions of the works of art that we have. So, continuing with the adults, we talk more about the Aztecs, the period of time, 1325 AD to about 1521, et cetera, like that. But here's the thing we do with it, I do with adults. When you're looking at it, you identified the broken teeth. You identified, and we talked about the cracks and having had it put together. So I'm going to divide you into 2 groups. And one group of you is going to take the position of, I think we should have restored it to its original appearance. The other group of you are going to give all 3 good reasons why we should leave it as it is. So I give each group 3 minutes to prepare their case, and one of them to present the 3 reasons why they think it should be restored, and the other group to give the reasons why it stays the way it is. A fun activity. It's especially fun when I have families there and get the kids involved in it as well. And I do that with older students. So, any questions so far? Okay, so continue our tour. Thank you. Okay. There's something. With this. Okay. This is one of the most iconic pieces of at the Dallas Museum of Art. It's probably one of the most asked for because of some of the circumstances involved in the story. But one of the main things about it, you're adults still. Got the whoops here. But I looked out at the audience, that's the media, and I was talking to my adult. Okay, so here we start in 1979, in October of 1979, at auction, in 3 minutes and 45 seconds, this work of art sold for $2.5 million. At the time, landscape was not the most popular form of art. It moved along into more contemporary. And so it was a surprisingly large sum of money for a painting of this nature. It's quite a large painting. I failed to look up the exact dimensions, but it would, excuse me, fit in few of our living rooms. I can tell you, it's that large. Well, the man who bought it happened to have been from Dallas, Texas. And it wouldn't fit in his living room either. He had $2.5 million, but his living room wasn't quite big enough for it to be contained. So what he decided to do was to loan it to the Dallas Museum of Art until he was prepared to move it to his home. And so when we received it as a loan, we set it up exactly as Frederick Church, the artist, had introduced it to the public in 1861 when the painting was first painted. Well, you kind of wonder about icebergs. How many people knew about icebergs in 1861? So if it's a kid's tour, I'll just say, well, why don't they just go take a picture and put it in the newspaper? And some smart kid will say, well, I'm not sure they had newspapers at that time or some such thing as that. But we all know that that's the case. So Frederick Church was so curious about icebergs because there was a rumor that the Franklin expedition from England had disappeared somewhere in the North Atlantic. So he chartered a boat, went up past Newfoundland, did a lot of sketches, came back, created the work of art, set it up in a theater in New York City, and charged 25 cents for people to come and see the painting. He had done this with the previous painting. He was actually a member of the Geological Society and had gone to some extreme locations and made magnificent paintings of the Andes, of Niagara Falls, different things of that sort. But he was so curious about it, the original name of the painting was The North. He set this up in the theater. He told all about what icebergs were. He printed a sheet. So for 25 cents, you got to see the painting. You got all the details about icebergs. But let me just remind you, what was going on in the United States in 1861?
Civil War.
So guess what? That's why at that point, the name was changed to the icebergs. And he had planned on donating the money that he got to pay for the Red Cross of the North. And so some changes, some plans happened. The painting did not sell when he displayed it in New York. So he decided to send it to England, where the Franklin expedition had originated. And it was purchased and ultimately then came back and was bought by the gentleman in Dallas. But after a short period of time, this man decided he would just give it to the Dallas Museum of Art on one condition: that his name never be on the plaque as the benefactor of that until after he passed away. He passed away a few years ago, but it's a name many of you will recognize. And some of you may know what it is because you've been to the museum with me before. Anybody want to make a guess?
Was it Stanley Marcus? No.
No, it was not Stanley. Has to do with the sports team,
Tom Landry.
not Tom Landry.
Um,
Not sports, it's not a football team that's in Dallas. Now,
Purchasing.
Murkison.
Lamar.
Oh,
Lamar is the purchaser. So now the land has been changed. And credit is given to he and his wife for the donation of that work of art. So, with students, just to give you a brief outline of how different it is, I don't talk so much about the history of it in terms of the purchase, or don't go into too much depth on the Franklin expedition. But this is a piece I often use with tours we have at the museum that are based on science, technology, engineering, and math. Global warming. What could be a better topic to talk about with students than the global warming with icebergs and even the nature of an iceberg, what happens when they separate, what happens when a piece falls apart. And of course, I always ask, you know, seen the movie The Titanic? Yeah, seen the movie Titanic. Well, guess what? The icebergs had an impact on the Titanic. 70% of an iceberg is under the water. Oh, they don't, but, and so that's kind of why it becomes interesting to them. So we've had an example of a couple of ways, different ways that tours take place at the Dallas Museum of Art. And I always try to end to whatever group it is. You can go over there, we'll stop right there. Because we have 5,000 years of history, all cultures of the world. We have 26,000 works of art. Obviously, they're not all out at any one time, so we can rotate those periodically. And, you know, quite honestly, we have requests for exchanges, loan, we borrow, they borrow. You know, there's all sorts of deals to work out and lots of restrictions and a lot of costs involved. It's very interesting. But I also want to say the Dallas Museum of Art is free to the public. Anyone can come to the Dallas Museum of Art and be admitted at no cost unless it's a special exhibition. And we do have, of course, a lot of people, but there are some advantages of joining the Museum of Art. That one of the biggest advantages is you get to park free. And you know, parking is expensive these days. So for 65, if you're a senior, for 75, if not, for a year, you know, depending, of course, on how you come, then your admission is basically free. And you're also entitled to certain exhibitions at no cost for at least 2 or 4 tickets at each time that you come. So those are definitely advantages. That's fine. So, these are just recapping some of the things I said, but about once a month now, we offer family free days where everyone gets them free, and we have all sorts of activities and different things for the kids. They're usually on a Sunday afternoon. Sometimes they're on Saturday and Sunday. So there's many, many opportunities to spend some very exciting and interesting time at the Dallas Museum of Art. And I would just welcome any of you anytime. We have lots of group opportunities, members of organizations, conventions that are in town that have booked tours for the people that are participating in those. If it's less than 10, you can call me. If it's more than 10, you really need to call the Dallas. So, any questions, anything that you'd like to comment?
What kind of exhibitions do you have coming up?
Oh, well, actually, I have one tomorrow, tour in one of our exhibitions that unfortunately is leaving in July. And honestly, it is one wall exhibition by Marisol Escobar. She was a Venezuelan, born in Paris, lived in a number of different places, and very, very close friend of Andy Warhol. So most of her work is, quote, pop art type. Most unusual things I have ever seen. And her life was also very interesting that fits in with it. It's the majority of it is sculpture. And there's so many interesting things about it that after you know, for example, every work of art, whether it's fish that she has found out of a beautiful wood or a party that has like 12 people in it. You'll have to come and see it. On the basis of. We also have reinstalled because we own the Kasama exhibition, which is the infinity one with all the pumpkins. So sometimes when we have a little break in between scheduled things, we'll bring out something that we own. So the Kasama exhibition with the infinity, with the pumpkins, with all the mirrors, etc., is on view to come up.
Just quickly, but over the 22 years you've been a wonderful docent, what exhibition or what had the most impact on you personally?
Well, I will confess, I have never had an art class, art history, nothing in my life. So how did I end up there in the first place? Why would they even hire me to do this? Even though I'm not paid, I still had to submit not only an application, I had to write a paper and I had to go do a presentation. And so I think I've always liked change and I've always liked being creative in some manner and to be able to because every 3 or 4 times a year, change the works of art, we change the exhibitions. It is a learning process. And I like.
Did you have a favorite piece though? Did you have a favorite?
I do, and it's not on view right at the moment, but it's quite interesting. It's actually by a Russian artist who originally started out as an engineer. So I'll leave it at that. And I'll tell you why it's not out right now. It's made out of a material that deteriorates easily if not being careful. Just like works on paper. Works on paper, if they're out on view, we can't let them be out on view more than 5 months, and then they have to go into storage for 5 years. And this is one of those. By the way, we have our own conservation studio, which is open anytime for me to go and look at. I got to go inside it in the sacred sterile area recently and examine some things. That was exciting. But I also do conservation tours where I really explain all of the equipment, go down and look at some of the works of art that have been conserved and do some activities down there as well. Okay, anything else? Good question.
You may have touched on this a little bit. Where's the art store that's not on display? And what is the age for seniors?
Okay, a few years ago, renovated the storage area, which is now almost all in a basement. And it's beautifully organized. Been one of the lucky ones to get to go to the basement and see all the drawers, the labels, and the way it's all set. It's just unbelievable how efficient, nicely done it is. Did I answer your question or did I leave off part of it?
But the age for membership, I think she was asking
Oh,
about.
For
The
seniors.
senior.
What's the age for
Oh,
seniors?
I think it's 65. Online, can know for sure, but I think that's right.
All right, thank you, Marilyn. In the few minutes we have left, I've got some service pins. Valerie Bosek is 5 years with Rotary. Rick Winston is here. And to recognize a person that joined Rotary when I was still a small child. Max Plant, 34 years. In other announcements, we will have a meeting next week, which will be my last meeting as president. It's Juneteenth and I will be liberated. And then the next week on the 26th is when Laura takes over her year. And with that, Ryan, would you lead us in the four-way test? Would you stand, please?
And please stand and join me in the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First.
Is it the?
Second.
Is it? Concerned.
Third.
Will it be good friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
We are adjourned.